You're listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I'm your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 190. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Troy Lambert, who is a freelance writer, author, editor, and publisher living in Boise, Idaho. He's written over 25 novels, including the Max Boucher mysteries. Had a great time talking to Troy about his novels and his writing process. Troy is an outline and plotting expert. He's also the education lead over at Plottr, which is the software that I use to outline my novels. So this is a good segue to tell you about this episode's sponsor, which is Masterclass. And in particular, I want to let you know about the James Patterson Masterclass. You can check it out at thrillingreads.com/Patterson. And it's an amazing masterclass. The folks over there at Masterclass are top of the game when it comes to creating fantastic masterclasses with experts in many fields like acting, cooking, even basketball, and of course, writing. And so if you want to see how I incorporated what I learned from the James Patterson Masterclass in my own writing process and how I create my outlines, you can check that out at thrillingreads.com/myjamesoutline. And so you can see it. It's a video. I'll walk you through my entire process, showing you how I outline the James Patterson way for my thrillers. And speaking of thrillers, today, September 6th, is the pub day of my second thriller, The Past Never Dies. It's in my Elijah Shaw thriller series. Really excited about this novel. The first one, Gringo Gulch, came out in July. This is the second one. The third one will be coming out in October. You can check it out at thrillingreads.com/pass. There you'll be able to read the first 3 chapters for free and learn more about the book. That's thrillingreads.com/pass. All right. Thank you so much for your support. Really do appreciate it. And here is my interview with Troy Lambert. Welcome to the podcast, Troy.
Well, thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit offline before I started recording. You wear a lot of hats in the writing publishing community. Can you tell us a little bit about your background before you got to that?
Oh, my goodness. Well, so before I started writing full time, I tell people I had a series of careers and hairnets and name tags, basically because from a very young age, I wanted to be a writer. But all those people that know, the school counselors, all those people all told me it was impossible, that it was just an impossible dream. And so I believed them. And I went off and tried to live my life some other way. And that did not work for me, clearly, and it just never did. So when I came to the writing world, the first thing I did was I started writing full time and I needed to make some extra money. And so I had a friend of mine who started a publisher. And he's like, do you want to work as an editor? Well, I had done editing before in a journalism capacity. And so I said, sure, I'll jump in and learn this from the book end of things. I need to learn about it anyway. From there, I guess when I first started indie publishing, there was no roadmap then. Now there's kind of several roadmaps. You can choose which one you follow. Then there was no roadmap. Nobody knew. None of us knew what we were doing. And so as I've evolved as a writer, my thought has always been that I want to help other writers avoid the many mistakes that I made when I started out. And that's really where all these hats start to come from, is that somebody will say, can you help with this? And I'll be like, yes, I can, because it's something that's important to me. And it's kind of, it's a passion of mine, is helping other writers. So it's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. For our listeners, I met Troy in the real world. He at a conference last year in Las Vegas, and with the nature that you have in you volunteered to do the meetup for the thriller authors, which ended up being kind of a lot more work than you thought it was going to be, right?
Yes, it did. I mean, it went from a small group of authors to a very large group of authors in a very large venue. Because I thought, when I first took it over, there were only 30, 40 people. And I thought, how hard can it be to find a venue for 30 or 40 people in Las Vegas on a Wednesday night? It turns out that's harder than you would think, oddly enough. And but what I loved about that was that everyone wanted to come. There was just a certain amount of the whole idea of camaraderie and spending time together in a place, and it turned out to be just an absolutely wonderful event. I mean, I was exhausted when it was over, but it was absolutely fantastic because there was so much of people meeting other people, some of them meeting people who they really admired, their heroes, others just meeting with peers. It was great. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that's really something good now, especially now that things are opening up more after a couple of years of lockdowns. Is if you're being able to meet other people. I mean, it really, uh, and I'm an introvert. Like most writers. I'm not a big extrovert type of person, but it's just nice to meet people face to face. And like you said, there were some pretty big hitters at your meetup too. It's like, whoa, wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think when we talk about writers being introverts, I think we're kind of a mix. Most of us are kind of a mix. And a friend of mine describes it as like there are people that are social field mice. They need to eat every 30 minutes or so, or they'll just shrivel away and die. And many writers are more like pythons. We're social pythons. We eat one big heap of social at a conference or something like that, and we're good for 6 months.
Yeah,
So it's
I love it. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
it works that way.
Yeah. And then like, okay, now I'm starting to get hungry again. Start looking at the
Yeah.
clock. Yeah. And it's like I was saying too, now you've done a lot of things. You've done ghostwriting and everything. And I think that's important to talk about because like for aspiring writers, of other ways that are out there to supplement your income while you're getting your books out there. How would you recommend that for people who might be thinking of doing that, of maybe supplementing their income by editing, for example?
Well, I would say this. There are a surprising number of authors that have a side hustle that's usually writing related. That's kind of how they supplement their book income. And sometimes they keep doing it even after their books are making money because it's fun and we like it. And so I would say, yeah, if you're going to have a side hustle when you're bringing your books up and your books are finally making it and stuff like that, have it be something that's publishing and writing related because you're going to learn lessons in those areas and those jobs that you wouldn't learn somewhere else. In editing, I learned a lot. Like I had an editor over me when I first started, obviously, because I didn't know what I was doing. Um, except more from a journalistic standpoint. And fiction is very, very different. And the things that I learned from that person helped me not only in my own writing, but in helping other writers along the way. And there's a certain amount of satisfaction that comes from that. And then there's a certain amount when it comes to ghostwriting and things like that. There's a certain amount of what I tell people what I really am as a storyteller, author, editor, book coach, all ghostwriter, all those different things. All I'm doing is I'm either telling my own story or I'm helping other people tell their stories. But in the end, all of it is really storytelling, right? And for me, that's where the passion really lies, is in that storytelling. So if I'm going to do a side hustle, with a few exceptions that I've had along the way, it's usually something that's publishing and writing related.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it, and great idea to be kind of keep your pulse in the industry too as you're coming up. So you mentioned before you always wanted to be a writer. Can you tell us a little bit about your starting out? Like, who were your authors that influenced you? What kind of books did you start writing? How did you get into the thriller mystery world?
Oh, well, it's actually kind of interesting because when I was a kid, so I wrote my first book when I was 6 called George and the Giant Castle. It was a fantasy. It was horrible, and you're never going to see it because I illustrated it too myself. And I didn't have funds for an illustrator at the time. But when I was growing up, my biggest influences were sci-fi and fantasy for the most part. I mean, especially hard sci-fi, Arthur C. Clarke, Ben Bova, Isaac Asimov, Robert A. Heinlein, all those guys, that was my influence. And I read a lot of fantasy too. I read a lot of Terry Brooks and, things like that. But as I started writing my own stuff, I tried to write sci-fi and it just kind of didn't work for me. I don't know how else to put that. It just didn't work for me. But where I found was that every story I was writing was in some way a mystery or thriller. And if I tried to write sci-fi, it was a mystery thriller sci-fi. If I tried to write fantasy, it was a mystery and thriller with dragons. If I tried to write something else, it was I was actually, at one point, I was a managing editor of an erotica series, a steamy romance series. And so I wrote one of the books in that series, and it's a steamy romance mystery thriller. There's a detective, his wife, there's a dead body, the crime gets solved. So I'm like, I've just found this was my voice. This is where I came from. But also Stephen King and Dean Koontz and people like that were very much, that was, though they were very much my happy place as far as reading goes. So, and still is to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's funny. So no matter what genre you're writing in, there's always like a little like a thriller or mystery going on in the background. So yeah, so you're like, oh, might as well just get into it.
Might as well just do it. I found that was my author voice, and I'm like, I tried to not do that, and it never worked. So I'm like, well, I guess I might as well do what works. I mean, if I'm going to make a career out of this thing, I might as well figure it out. So.
And can you tell us a little bit then about your latest novel? What do you is that the Mac Voucher series that you're working on, or?
Yes. So my latest one was the second in and it's the Max Boucher series. Boucher is basically French for butcher.
Oh, I like it.
But he's the detective. He's the good guy. He's the good guy. At least for now. But my latest one was one of my favorites, and it's called Teaching Moments. And I wanted to do something unusual with a serial killer that was something that was out of the norm. And I've done a lot of psychology research and stuff about serial killers. There's a book called The Mask of Sanity, which is it's basically still the textbook that they use for the FBI Behavioral Sciences Unit that was written in like 1943, updated in the 60s, but still, when it comes to psychopaths and sociopaths, it's the book. Super enjoy it. But so I wanted to do something that was a little bit out of the norm. And so Teaching Moments was the result. And it's a story where it tells Max's story, Max Boucher, and he accepts a case to find a stolen horse. There's a murderer in the process. He thinks the two are related, all on the way. And then there's a parallel story of a confession that we don't know who's making that confession. We actually don't know who they're talking to until the very end. And those two things tie together at the end of the book. And it's one of my favorite books that I've written, actually. And then the one I'm working on right now is the sequel to that one called Compelled. And it's another serial killer I've wanted to write for a while. So this guy's been roaming around in my head. It's time for him to get out on the page and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's wonderful when you finally get it. When you've had it in your head for so long to finally get it out, it's like so satisfying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love serial killers.
It's pretty incredible. Yeah.
And so I know that you're a master plotter. I know you do the plotting, and you actually the education lead, right, for a great software that I use called Plottr. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about your process? How before you start to write, how what your process is like?
So usually, like if I'm starting a new series or something, it usually starts with character. So even in my series, it starts with the characters. Like, who is this character? So even in the Max Boucher series, usually I'm starting with whoever my killer is. Like, who's my killer? What are their methods, and what's the psychology behind it? And then I say, okay, so as a result of that, what happens? So I kind of say, this is the character. If I put him in this situation, what if? What if this happens? What if this happens? What's next? What's next? That type of thing. And so usually that's the way it starts. And for me, usually that character is something that comes to me at some point along the way. And then when I plot, even though people think, I'm a master plotter, I'm an architect, all that kind of stuff, and I can be, but for my own plots, most of the time, that the scene descriptions that I come up with for the plot along the way are actually pretty simple. They're really just writing prompts for what I'm going to write that day. So I try not to overplot so that it really impacts my creativity. But if I know that if I underplot, which is what I used to do, I used to underplot a lot, then I would get stuck because I wouldn't know where I was going. So this process that I've developed over time, it essentially enables me to write all the way through. And then when I'm in the writing process, if I write something different that day than what I planned, I go back into Plottr in my outline and I change it. so that I know when I go back to revise my book, I go, oh, that's where I took that left turn. That's why this is a little bit different. And I can go back and make sure it still works when I go through the revision process. It makes revising way, way faster, which is probably the most important thing for me, is making that process faster.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's what I tell people also. If they're, I mean, if writing by the seat of their pants is working for somebody, then that's great. But if not, people get afraid. They don't want to try plotting because they don't want to be. They think it's too rigid. But it's like we're not machines, you know. If something,
Nope.
you know, I'm the same way. I outline everything, but then things change and characters do different things, and you just go with it. You know, it's all part of the process.
Yeah, you get to know your characters along the way, is the way I feel. It's like
Yeah.
at first you've got an introduction to them and you kind of know some things about them, but you can't know everything about them until you start writing about their life and the things that they do. And once you start that process, then you go, oh, okay, that's a little bit different than what I thought, but
Hmm.
it still works, so it's okay. So you just make sure that the story continues to work. And so I mean, I do more stringent plotting in the revision process than I do in the initial plotting process, just to make sure that the draft is tight, that it works. There's no plot holes, no unresolved clues, all those different things, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and then once you're ready to start writing, do you what do you use? You use like Word? Do you use Scrivener?
I'm a Scrivener guy.
Hmm.
I when I converted to Scrivener, before there was a plotter, when I converted to Scrivener, I found that my writing speed went up about a third, about 30%, when I switched over to Scrivener. It was just faster. I felt like I was more organized, and it allows me to concentrate. It's almost a psychological trick for me now. I do editing and like technical writing, blog writing, and stuff like that in Word, and I only write fiction in Scrivener. So when I open Scrivener, my brain goes, "Oh, we're fiction writing." You know, I've been doing it long enough. My brain realizes, "Oh, this is what we're doing. We don't do anything else in this program, so it's got to be fiction writing." So it helped my muse show up faster, basically.
No, that's interesting. So you trained yourself Scrivener fiction. That's cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and so with all of these different things that you do, how do you? What's like a day like? Is there no such thing as a typical writing day? I think for most authors, but what's a day like for you? How do you get organize yourself?
Um, so usually I try to, my best writing time is in the morning, is early in the morning. And that's because I tell people my first novel. I was in the military, so I learned to get up early anyway, because for some reason they didn't give us an option. It's just weird, right? The military makes you follow orders and stuff. It's strange. But anyway, but I had little kids at home, and I figured out that if I stayed up late to write, my kids would wonder, and hey, Dad, how come you get to stay up and I don't? But I've also found that little kids don't get up at 4:30 in the morning for things they want to do, let alone things they don't want to. So my best time to write was 4:30 in the morning because my kids would not interrupt me. So I had a little office that was under our stairs at the time. It used to be a closet. I think it used to be a pantry or something, but I converted it into an office and I wrote under those stairs from 4:30 to 7:30. So still my best time to write is in the morning. I don't get up quite that early anymore. I don't have kids. I have dogs instead, but so usually I get up around 5:30, 5:45, and I do some writing initially. I take a break and do some, typical admin stuff like that, and usually hope that doesn't take me too long. And then I get back to writing for as long as I can in the morning, and then usually some administrative tasks and things like that start to take over, and I kind of get to that point where I have to do those things. Um, and then in the afternoon, I try to schedule in another writing session if I can, and then usually it's marketing and or other things that I'm doing, various editing, coaching, and things along that line. Editing takes up a large part of my time as well. So depending on what projects I have at hand.
And when you're writing a project, do you like have goals for yourself that you said, like I'm going to do X amount of words per day? Is it how do you gauge that?
I try to do between 2 and 4,000 words a day, depending on if I can squeeze in a second writing session. But if I'm towards the end or something like that, I will schedule days where I'll do a sprint and I will cancel everything else except for writing, and I'll do, like a 8,000 word day. I've done 10,000 word days before. They are really, really hard. And what I felt like was that towards the end of the day, the quality of my writing suffered. And so I don't do those as much anymore. Try not to put myself in a deadline position where I have to,
Yeah. Yeah, those are. Yeah, I've had a couple, 8,000, 9,000 word days, and they really drain you. It's kind of weird because you wouldn't think about it, but like your neck, like everything. It's just you kind of like it just takes a lot out of you. Those big writing days.
Yeah, and then it's also hard to work the next day.
Yeah,
like part of the deal with writing is just consistency. Like a consistent, the thing Nano does for people is it helps you develop a consistent writing habit. Whether that's daily, 3 times a week, whatever it is, you just need a regular, consistent writing schedule. And so I think that consistency is really important. Well, when you do a 10K day, the next day you're not following your normal schedule because it's almost impossible to follow that up with just a normal day and act like everything's fine because your brain is trash, your creativity is trash. So if you're trying to finish a book and kind of, just put something to bed, that's a fine method to, sprint and finish something up, but don't expect that to help you with your consistency,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what are you working on now? So you're working on the second book, on the
third book, the third in the Max Boucher series, which is titled Compelled. And I'm actually working on finishing up a ghostwriting project as well. That's going to be really, really fun. It's actually more of a co-written project, and my name will actually be on the cover of the book. But it's a true story of a haunting and demon possession of a house in England, and it's the house was actually on Help My House is Haunted program on Discovery, and it's just been a really fun and fascinating story to work on. So I'm almost done with that one. That one's almost put to bed.
All right, great. Is that coming out this year too, or?
Yep, that'll come out this year as well. It's called Satan's Portal: The Demon House of Nuneaton is what that one's titled, and that'll be out this year too.
And how do you like working with as a co-author? How did that work? Is that do you enjoy that, or is that was a different challenge when doing solo?
I've done co-authoring things before that worked well, and some of them didn't work well. This particular one worked really well because I'm actually primarily the author. It's the other person's story, but I'm the one that's putting it in story format. They're not a writer per se. So even though it's a joint project, most of the writing part of it is actually me. So I'm good with that. Co-writing is actually really fun if you get the right person and you're on the right project. It can be really fun. But you need to, that's a whole topic, like in and of itself, of making sure how compatible you are and that you've got the writing style and also the same idea of the writing speed and things like that. Otherwise, you can cause yourself a lot of frustration.
Yeah,
so
I can imagine. So, Troy, I always ask my guests about advice for aspiring writers that are listening to this podcast, because I know I have a few out there, and you're great because you've done a lot of things. What's some advice that you would have for an aspiring thriller mystery writer?
Oh my goodness! I guess my primary advice for someone is to find the fun in what you do. This job, if you choose to do this for a living, to write for a living, this job is really, really hard. There are easier ways to make money. You can buy an RV, learn some chemistry, something, buy some car washes, something your family can really get behind, right? But so being a writer is really, really hard. So don't take the fun out of it. So many times people they start to write for a living and it becomes not fun to them. I've got all this marketing, all these business things I have to do, and I'm writing to market. So maybe I'm writing something I actually don't want to write that much or whatever. And I'm like, just don't do that. Be sure you keep the fun in your writing from the start to finish, no matter what you do with it. Because it's just something that's way too hard not to have fun while you're doing it.
Yeah, that is good advice because easy, quick burnout if you're just doing it for
Oh, yeah. If you're doing this to make money, like people will come to me and say, I want to make a living writing, right? And I'll tell them, my first question is, what do you mean by make a living?
Mhm.
Like, how much money do you need to make a living? And I'm like, that may sound like a personal question, but it's the truth. Is because if you're looking for a mansion in the suburbs, a Mercedes, a couple Mercedes in the driveway, 5 kids, 2.5 dogs, whatever, that may be a struggle for you, especially initially. So you need to revise what you mean by make a living. Like, how much money do you actually need to make from your writing? And how plausible is that with your skill set, with what you want to do, with what your connections are, let's say in the traditional publishing industry, whatever? What does that look like for you? And you need to just be very realistic with yourself, because this is, again, it's a very hard profession. So if you're going to do it as a living, you really need to evaluate what the right path for you is towards doing this for a living.
Okay. All right. And where it's for the listeners, what's the best way they can find you? I'm assuming it's at your website.
Yep, and my website, TroyLambertWrites.com, on all the socials. And I always tell people you can Google me. And if I don't come up when you Google me, your internet service is down. You need to contact your internet service provider. Something is broken somewhere along the way. I'm kind of all over the place. So if you Google me, you'll find all the socials and all the things. I'm probably on Twitter and Facebook more than anything else, although I'm not on Facebook as much as I used to be. So, yeah, it's kind of changing, but yeah.
Yeah, and I recommend to go check out your videos on Plottr, using Plottr and plotting, because they're really great. They're really I picked up some nice nuggets from you on your videos.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, Thursdays with Troy on YouTube. Yeah. We were very creative with the name. Usually they came out on Thursdays, and the host name was Troy. So we really thought of it long and hard about that and put that together.
I was wondering how you came up with that.
Yeah, one of those things, really using my creativity. But yeah, there's all kinds of videos there and interviews with other authors and about how they use Plottr and how they plot. And it's super, super informative.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks a lot, Troy. It was real nice talking to you about the writing and your books and all that good stuff.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers, or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.